I watch her. Veronica Winters, the woman who made my first life a living hell, now squirming in her overpriced apartment because the rent just doubled. It's almost delicious. She's pacing, phone pressed to her ear, voice tight with a panic I remember all too well. What do you mean the owner won't budge?" she's saying, her usually impeccable blonde hair looking a bit frazzled. It's predatory. I can't afford this." She doesn't recognize me, of course. Why would she? The Maya Chen she knew 15 years ago was a mouse. A timid, perpetually exhausted girl who wouldn't say boo to a goose, let alone to Queen Veronica. This Maya, the one standing here in a tailored suit, owner of half the city's prime real estate, is a ghost to her. A very powerful, very rich ghost. A cold little flame of satisfaction flickers inside me. I remember every single indignity. Every night I spent curled up on that lumpy, discarded rug on the floor of our dorm room because Veronica had a guest. Or worse, the nights I was allowed to share the bed, crammed against the cold wall, while she and her boyfriend of the week took up all the space, their whispers and giggles a soundtrack to my misery. I can't move right now," Veronica says, her voice cracking. She hangs up, slumping onto a plush velvet sofa, a sofa I technically own. "I'm still paying off student loans. This is a nightmare." Student loans? The words hit me like a physical blow, and suddenly I'm not in this chic apartment anymore. I'm back in that tiny, suffocating dorm room. The air is thick, stale. I can't breathe. My chest aches with a familiar, terrifying pressure. I'm 20 years old and I'm dying. My undiagnosed heart condition finally giving out under the relentless stress, crushed into a sliver of a twin bed. I blink, the opulent living room swimming back into focus. The air here is clean, filtered, but the ghost of that suffocation lingers. "The rent increase stands, Miss Winters," I say, my voice smoother, colder than I intend. She jumps, startled. She's so caught up in her own drama, she probably forgot I was even here. "But who are you?" she asks, eyes narrowed, finally taking me in. There's a flicker, a tiny spark of something in her eyes. Does she see a ghost? Or just a woman in a power suit? "I'm the owner," I say simply, "and while the new rent is non-negotiable, I might be open to a special arrangement." Her head snaps up, a desperate hope dawning in her eyes. "Arrangement? What kind of arrangement?" I let a small, knowing smile play on my lips. "A chance to stay. If you're willing to live under certain conditions. My conditions." She hesitates. I can see the war in her face. Pride versus desperation. Desperation wins. It always does. "What? What conditions?" I walk towards the window, looking out over the city that's now mine. "Oh, we'll discuss the details." I turn back to her, my smile widening. "But first, you agree. In writing." She chews her lip, her gaze darting around the apartment, probably calculating the cost of moving, the humiliation of asking her parents for help, if they're even still speaking after her latest drama. Finally, with a sigh that seems to deflate her entirely, she nods. "Okay, fine, I agree." She has no idea who I am. No idea what she's just signed up for. I leave her there, clutching a hastily drawn-up agreement. As the elevator descends, a thought crystallizes in my mind, hard and sharp as a diamond. In my first life, I never stood up for myself. In this one, I'll make you understand exactly what it felt like to have no control. 18. I was 18, and the world felt like an oyster, or at least that's what the brochure for Northwood University implied. Scholarship clutched in my hand, a brand new, slightly too big sweater from my mom, I stepped onto that sprawling green campus with a heart full of nervous excitement. I was the first in my family to go to college. This was it, my big chance. Then I met Veronica. She was already in the room when I arrived, a whirlwind of expensive perfume and designer luggage. Blonde, beautiful, radiating an effortless confidence that made me feel like a clumsy farm animal in comparison. She took one look at my sensible, secondhand suitcases and the faded band posters I'd brought to decorate my side of the room, and her perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. The dismissal was instant, absolute. "You must be Maya?" she said, her voice dripping with a politeness that felt colder than outright disdain. I tried. God, I tried. I smiled, offered her one of my mom's homemade cookies, chattered nervously about the classes I was excited for. She just gave me that same cool, appraising look. Then came the bombshell. The housing department, in its infinite wisdom, had made an error. We weren't in a double, we were in a single. One room, one desk, one closet, and one bed. We should request a room change, I said, my voice barely a squeak. Veronica scoffed, flicking her hair over her shoulder. Absolutely not. All my friends are in this hall. I have seniority. They'll move you if anyone. I should have fought. I should have gone straight to the housing office, made a scene, demanded a solution. But I was 18, terrified of making waves, and acutely aware that I couldn't afford off-campus housing. Veronica knew it too. I saw it in her eyes. She commandeered the room with the swift, brutal efficiency of a conquering general. 90% of the closet space was hers, her designer clothes spilling out in a riot of color and silk. The bathroom schedule revolved around her lengthy beauty rituals. The walls were soon covered in her art prints, her photos, her everything. My small corner, with my carefully chosen books and the picture of my family, felt like an afterthought, an unwelcome intrusion. The first time she kicked me out, it was for a hookup. That's what she called it. Her voice was casual, as if asking me to pass the salt. You don't mind, do you, Maya? Just for a couple of hours? I minded. I minded so much my stomach twisted into a knot, but I mumbled something about needing to study anyway and fled to the fluorescent hum of the 24-hour study lounge. I spent the night hunched over a textbook, the words blurring. The silence of the empty room a stark contrast to the imagined sounds from my own. Anxiety became my constant companion. My chest felt tight, my palms were always sweaty. I'd call home, listen to my parents' proud, excited voices, and swallow down the truth. How could I tell them their dream for me was already turning into a nightmare? Then came Veronica's compromise. Her boyfriend, a loud, arrogant jock named Chad, was practically a permanent fixture. Look, Maya, she said one afternoon, examining her perfectly manicured nails. Chad's going to be over a lot. It's just easier this way. You can sleep on the floor. Or, if you're not weird about it, you can just take the wall side of the bed. It's a twin XL, plenty of room. Plenty of room. For her and Chad, maybe. For me, it was a sliver of mattress, pressed against the cold, indifferent wall. I made one desperate, fumbling attempt to talk to the housing department. A bored-looking woman behind a counter barely glanced up from her computer. All rooms are currently assigned. There's a waiting list. But honestly, honey, it's long. You're better off just working it out with your roommate. Work it out. As if Veronica was interested in working anything out. That night, the first dull ache started in my chest. Stress, I told myself, just stress. I ignored it, curled up on my designated sliver of bed, and prayed for morning. 3 months. 3 months of this quiet, insidious torture, and I was unraveling. My grades, once a source of pride, were slipping. How could I concentrate when I was averaging 4 hours of broken sleep a night? How could I study when my own room felt like enemy territory? Veronica's tactics escalated, became bolder. My carefully rationed snacks disappeared from the tiny fridge. My favorite sweater, the one my grandmother knitted, was borrowed and returned stained with something that smelled suspiciously like cheap beer and cigarette smoke. I started developing actual anxiety attacks, my heart pounding, breath catching in my throat whenever I had to psych myself up to even walk down the hall to our room. Her friends, a cackling clique of girls just as wealthy and entitled as she was, joined in the fun. They'd lounge on her bed, their laughter echoing in the small space, making snide comments about my clothes. Are those vintage or just old? My slight, almost imperceptible accent from my working-class neighborhood, the way I obsessively highlighted my textbooks. I became their unwilling entertainment. Once, just once, I tried to stand up for myself. Veronica had borrowed my noise-canceling headphones, the only thing that gave me a semblance of peace, and I'd found them broken in her gym bag. Veronica, those were expensive, I'd said, my voice trembling but firm. You need to replace them. Her eyes narrowed. Are you accusing me of something, Maya? Because I could easily report you for aggressive behavior. You know how seriously they take that here. The fight just drained out of me. Aggressive behavior? Me. It was laughable, but the threat was real. I was the scholarship kid. She was Veronica. I retreated, defeated. My heart problems were getting worse. Palpitations, a constant flutter in my chest, shortness of breath when I climbed the stairs to our third floor room. I went to Campus Health, a sterile, impersonal clinic. The doctor, a harried man who looked as tired as I felt, listened to my chest for a perfunctory 10 seconds. Sounds like anxiety, young lady. College is stressful. Try some deep breathing, maybe yoga. He scribbled a prescription for a low-dose tranquilizer I never filled. Thanksgiving break was a brief, blessed respite. My parents noticed how pale I was, how thin I'd become. Are you eating enough, sweetie? Are you sleeping? I minimized. Just stressed with midterms, Mom. College is a lot, you know? I couldn't bear to see the worry in their eyes, to shatter their image of my triumphant college experience. Returning after the break was like stepping back into a cage. Veronica had clearly gone through my things. My diary, a cheap, lockable notebook I'd hidden under my mattress, was lying on my desk open, my deepest, most private thoughts splayed out for her amusement. The humiliation was a fresh, burning wave. She didn't even have the decency to be subtle about it. A few days later, in the dining hall, I overheard her regaling her friends with a dramatically embellished story about my crush on a quiet boy in my calculus class, details she could only have known from my diary. Their laughter followed me out the door. My only lifeline, my only semblance of a friend, was Ryan. He worked at the library circulation desk, a kind, nerdy guy with glasses and a shared love for obscure science fiction. He saw how tired I looked, how I flinched when loud noises startled me. He'd save me the quietest carols, slip me an extra cookie from his lunch. You know, Maya, he said one evening, his voice gentle, if your roommate situation is bad, you can report it. There are resources. I just shook my head, too defeated, too ashamed to even articulate the extent of Veronica's cruelty. What could anyone really do? The winter formal, I knew it would be bad. Veronica and her crew were having an after-party in our room. I wasn't invited, obviously. I spent the entire night huddled in the drafty hallway, wrapped in my thin coat, trying to sleep on the cold, unforgiving linoleum. The thumping bass of their music, their shrieks of laughter seeped through the door, a constant reminder of my exile. I started spending more and more time in the library, even when I didn't have to study. The 24-hour study spaces became my refuge. At least there, I could breathe. At least there, I was alone. After winter break, Veronica returned with a new level of brazenness. It was as if my continued passive endurance had only emboldened her. She knew I wouldn't fight back. She knew she had won. The floor became my permanent bed, even when Chad wasn't there. My side of the closet shrank to a tiny sliver, barely enough for a few changes of clothes. The room was hers. I was just a ghost, haunting the periphery of her glittering, careless life. One night, I woke up gasping for air, a stabbing pain in my chest. I was crammed against the wall, Veronica and Chad sprawled across the rest of the bed, their limbs heavy, indifferent. I couldn't breathe. I really, truly couldn't breathe. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. It was the day of my microeconomics final. I'd studied for weeks, fueled by caffeine and sheer desperation. Despite the constant ache in my chest, the way my heart hammered at the slightest exertion. This exam, this grade, felt like the only thing I could control in a life that was rapidly spinning out of my grasp. I stumbled out of the exam hall, drained but a little lighter. I'd done okay, maybe, all I wanted was sleep. Real deep, uninterrupted sleep. I pushed open the door to our room, my room, and my heart sank. Veronica was there, of course, and Chad. They were sprawled on the bed, watching a movie on her laptop, a tangle of limbs and shared popcorn. Hey, Veronica said, not even looking up. You're back. Yeah, I mumbled. Finals are done. My voice was thick with exhaustion. I really need to sleep. I was up all night. Veronica sighed, a long, put-upon exhalation. God, Maya, can't you just, go to the library or something? Tears pricked at my eyes. I was so tired. So tired. Please, Veronica, just for a few hours. I'm exhausted. She exchanged a look with Chad. He shrugged. Fine, Veronica conceded, her voice grudging. But we're watching this movie, so you'll have to be quiet. Quiet, as if I was ever anything else. I crawled into my designated sliver of space, pressing myself against the cold, familiar wall. The movie blared, their occasional laughter a sharp intrusion. I closed my eyes, willing sleep to come, to offer me a temporary escape. The ache in my chest was a dull, persistent throb. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt thick, heavy. I drifted off, finally, into a shallow, uneasy slumber. My last sensation was the feeling of being crushed, the weight of their presence, the lack of air. My heart, already strained, already damaged by months of unrelenting stress and a condition no one had bothered to find, gave a final, exhausted flutter, and then nothing. I remember snippets of what came after, like fragmented images from a dream. My parents' faces, ravaged by a grief so profound it seemed to suck all the air from the room. The hushed, somber tones of the memorial service. And Veronica, dabbing at her eyes with a delicate lace handkerchief, her face a mask of carefully constructed remorse. She was such a sweet girl, I heard her whisper to someone. So quiet. We were just getting to know each other. The lie was so audacious, so blatant, it would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. Then, darkness. A vast, empty, silent darkness. And then, light, blinking, confusion. I was small. My hands were tiny. I was in my childhood bedroom, the one with the faded glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. My Little Pony posters adorned the walls. It was 2000. I was 10 years old, 10 years before I died. The shock was a physical force, knocking the breath from my undersized lungs. It had to be a dream. A vivid, elaborate, terrifyingly real dream. I pinched myself. Hard, I yelped. Not a dream, days turned into weeks. The initial, frantic disbelief slowly, painstakingly gave way to a dawning, terrifying acceptance. This was real. I had been given a second chance. A chance to live. A chance to do things differently. The memories were all there, crystal clear, the suffocation, the pain, Veronica, college, everything. The first thing I did, once the sheer, overwhelming unreality began to subside, was talk to my parents. I sat them down, my small 10-year-old voice filled with an adult's conviction. I told them about my heart. I used words no 10-year-old should know. Congenital condition, arrhythmia, palpitations. I described the symptoms with a chilling, irrefutable accuracy. They were scared, confused, but they listened, and they took me to a specialist. The diagnosis came swiftly. A rare congenital heart defect. Treatable, the doctor said, with a new procedure, one that hadn't been widely available or perhaps even known in my first timeline. The relief was so immense, it was dizzying. I wouldn't die at 20. Not this time. And with that relief came a cold, hard resolve. In this life, I would never be powerless again. I would never be a victim. I would never be crushed. I started planning, meticulously, carefully. The advantage of foreknowledge was a powerful, intoxicating thing. I knew what was coming. I knew who to trust and who to avoid. I knew where the opportunities lay. One afternoon, driven by a morbid curiosity, a teenage Maya, now healthy, thriving, but with old eyes, sat down at our family's bulky desktop computer. I typed a name into the search bar, Veronica Winters, and her father's name came up, Harrison Winters, and his company, Winters Property Holdings. Their portfolio was extensive, apartment buildings, commercial spaces. And then I saw it. A familiar address. A building I knew all too well, my old dorm, the one where I died. Winters Property Holdings owned it. Her family owned the building where my first life ended. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. My second adolescence was a blur of focused ambition. The shy, hesitant Maya was gone, replaced by a girl who knew what she wanted and, more importantly, how to get it. Confidence wasn't an act. It was a shield forged in the fires of a past life. I aced my classes, not just through rote memorization, but with a surprising aptitude, as my teachers called it, for strategic thinking. They didn't know my secret weapon. I'd lived through most of this before. While other teenagers were obsessing over pop stars and social drama, I was devouring books on investment, business strategy, and real estate. The names that would become behemoths, Apple, Amazon, Google, were just fledgling companies then, and I knew exactly which ones to back. Babysitting money, birthday checks, any spare cash I could scrounge went into carefully chosen stocks. My parents, bless their trusting hearts, thought I had a knack for it. They had no idea my knack was 20 years of hindsight. College loomed. The same university. Northwood. But this time, there would be no dorms. No roommates. No Veronica Winters dictating my existence. I secured a place in a small off-campus apartment months before orientation, using the profits from my early, shockingly successful investments. Orientation. I saw her, of course. Veronica. She hadn't changed much, still radiating that same effortless, entitled beauty. She swept past me in a cloud of expensive perfume, not even a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Why would there be? To her, I was just another face in the crowd. This time, I didn't even try to smile. I cultivated a different kind of college experience. I wasn't there for the parties or the fleeting social scene. I was there to build. I majored in business with a focus on real estate, and my professors were astounded by my insights, my grasp of market trends. I joined the investment club not as a nervous newbie, but as a quiet force, my suggestions often leading to surprisingly lucrative outcomes for the club's portfolio. I strategically befriended people who mattered, ambitious students, well-connected faculty, even a few local business owners. I was building a network, a foundation, a fortress that Veronica, with her petty cruelties, could never touch. By sophomore year, I'd started my first small investment company, pooling resources from a few trusted individuals who'd seen my track record. We focused on early tech, and the returns were significant. Occasionally, I'd see Veronica from afar. She was still Queen Bee, still surrounded by her sycophantic clique, still leaving a trail of bruised egos and intimidated underclassmen in her wake. Each sighting was a small, cold reminder of my purpose. At 22, while my peers were worrying about graduation and entry-level jobs, I made my first real estate purchase, a small, slightly run-down apartment building in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. I used my knowledge of future development plans gleaned from my past life's memories of city council meetings and local news reports to make a shrewd investment. My portfolio grew, slowly at first, then with increasing momentum. I bought undervalued properties, renovated them, and leveraged them to acquire more. The financial crisis of 2008, a disaster for so many, was an opportunity for me. I knew which institutions would survive, which assets would rebound. While others were panicking, I was buying. It was during this period, sifting through financial reports and property listings, that I stumbled upon a familiar name. Winters Property Holdings. They were struggling. Badly. The 2008 crash had hit them hard. They were over-leveraged, their assets depreciating. Whispers of insolvency started to circulate. And then, the golden piece of information, buried in a dry industry newsletter. To cover their mounting debts, Winters Property Holdings was being forced to sell off several of their less profitable assets, including a certain aging dormitory building on the Northwood University campus. I was 25. I sat in my sleek, modern office, the city lights twinkling outside my window. I pulled up my financial portfolio. The numbers glowed on the screen. It was more than enough. More than enough to make a serious play for the building. The building where I had died. The building that held the ghost of my past life. A very different kind of smile touched my lips this time. It wasn't cold. It was anticipatory. The acquisition of the dorm building, the one that haunted my memories, wasn't a straightforward affair. I couldn't just waltz in as Maya Chen, real estate prodigy, and make an offer. That would be too direct. Too easy for Veronica or her father to connect the dots later if they ever bothered to look. No, this needed finesse. I created a shell corporation, something with a bland, forgettable name. Apex University Housing Solutions, or something equally dull. Through a series of cutouts and lawyers, Apex made an offer on the Northwood dorm. The negotiations were a delicate dance. I knew with a certainty that bordered on clairvoyance just how desperate Winter's property holdings was. I knew their breaking point. I knew what the building was truly worth, not just in bricks and mortar, but in its potential, a potential only I could fully see, having lived into a future they couldn't imagine. I even had one face-to-face meeting with Harrison Winters, Veronica's father. He was a caricature of the overtanned, blustering, old-money businessman. He tried to intimidate my lawyer, tried to play hardball. I sat in the back of the room, a silent observer, my presence attributed to being a junior analyst for Apex. Watching him, seeing the arrogance, the ingrained sense of entitlement that had clearly trickled down to his daughter only solidified my resolve. We got the building. At a price that stung the Winters family, that much was clear from the tightness around Harrison's jaw when the papers were signed. It wasn't enough to bankrupt them entirely. That wasn't my goal. But it was a significant blow, a chink in their gilded armor. The dorm was old, run down, a relic of a bygone era. My first act as the new owner was to shut it down for a complete overhaul. I didn't just want to renovate it, I wanted to transform it. The cramped, depressing single rooms became sleek, modern micro-apartments. Luxury finishes, smart home technology, a rooftop terrace with a view of the campus. I rebranded it the Phoenix Lofts, a private little joke. But amidst the gleaming newness, I made sure to maintain a few affordable units. Smaller, less opulent, but still a world away from the squalor I remembered. And one specific unit on the third floor, occupying the exact footprint of my old room, room 312. That one, I kept special. The next decade was a whirlwind. My real estate empire expanded. Residential towers, commercial complexes, boutique hotels. I became a name in the industry, a young mogul spoken of in hushed, respectful tones. But through it all, I kept a discreet, almost obsessive watch on Veronica Winters. Her life, it turned out, hadn't gone according to her perfectly curated plan. She'd flamed out of graduate school art history, apparently. A string of dead-end jobs followed. Gallery assistant, fired. Event planner, quit after a disastrous wedding. Personal shopper, lasted 2 months. Her social media presence, once a beacon of smug triumph, became more sporadic, tinged with a subtle desperation. Pictures of brunches and parties were replaced by vague inspirational quotes and heavily filtered selfies. Then, a few months ago, a little bird, a well-placed contact in a high-end real estate agency, chirped. Veronica Winters was moving back to the city, looking for an apartment, something chic but affordable. The gears in my meticulously constructed plan began to turn. I had kept that one apartment, the ghost of room 312, vacant for years. Now, it was time. I instructed my property manager, a discreet, highly efficient woman who knew better than to ask too many questions, to advertise the unit at a temporarily enticingly reduced rate. Just enough to catch the eye of someone like Veronica, someone whose tastes outstripped her budget. I used an intermediary, a third-party rental agent, to handle the initial lease. My company's name, was nowhere near the paperwork. Veronica signed the lease, blissfully unaware of who her new landlady truly was. I watched her move in, not literally, of course, but through the building's state-of-the-art security system, I saw the movers haul in her slightly too trendy furniture, the boxes overflowing with clothes and knickknacks. I saw her direct them with that familiar air of impatient authority. She looked older, more tired than I remembered. But the core of Veronica, the entitlement, the self-absorption, it was still there. I waited. 6 months, I let her settle in, let her unpack her life, hang her pictures, arrange her velvet cushions. Let her feel secure. Let her believe she'd landed on her feet, snagged a bargain in a prime location, and then, and only then, did I make my move. The rent increase notice went out, a crisp, official-looking letter, doubling her monthly payment, effective immediately. And with it, a polite, almost cordial request for a tenant meeting, to discuss the new terms with the owner, personally. The trap was set. The intercom buzzed, a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the curated calm of Veronica's apartment. I saw her on the security feed, pacing, her hand fluttering to her throat. She looked pale, the usual confident set of her shoulders replaced by a nervous slump. Good. Yes, her voice, tinny through the speaker. Miss Winters, it's Maya Chen. We have an appointment. A pause, then the click of the door unlocking. She opened it, her face a carefully constructed mask of polite inquiry. It faltered just for a second as she took me in. The tailored suit, the expensive shoes, the air of quiet authority that I'd spent a lifetime cultivating. Ms. Chen? She frowned. Do I know you? You look familiar. There it was, that flicker. Not recognition, not yet. But something, a ghost of a memory perhaps, trying to surface from the depths of her self-absorption. I'm the owner of the building, I said, my voice cool, professional. I stepped inside, my heels clicking on her polished hardwood floors, my polished hardwood floors. Thank you for meeting with me. I watched her scramble to regain her composure. Right, the owner. Look, about this rent increase, it's insane. There has to be some mistake. There's no mistake, Miss Winters, I said, settling into one of her plush armchairs, her armchair. The previous rate was an introductory offer. The new rate reflects the current market value for a property of this caliber in this location. Panic flickered in her eyes again, quickly suppressed. But I can't afford that. I just moved in. I have a lease. A lease which, if you'll recall, has a clause allowing for rent adjustments with appropriate notice, I reminded her gently, which you received. She started to bluster, to argue, her voice rising. I let her. I listened patiently, my expression unreadable. I remembered another young woman, years ago, trying to reason with an immovable force, her pleas falling on deaf ears. When she finally wound down, breathless and flushed, I leaned forward. However, I said, my voice dropping to a more confiding tone. As I mentioned, I might be willing to offer you an alternative, a special arrangement. Hope, raw and desperate, flared in her eyes again. What kind of arrangement? You can continue to reside in this apartment at your current original rent, I said slowly, watching her face. Under certain conditions. Conditions, she repeated, wary now. Think of them as roommate guidelines, I said, a small, tight smile playing on my lips. To ensure a harmonious living environment. I then laid them out, the restrictions on bathroom access. Specific time slots, no lingering. Limitations on when she could use the living room. Common areas need to be respected. A drastic reduction in her allocated storage space. To maintain a clutter-free aesthetic. No guests after 9 p.m. No loud music. The list went on, each condition a carefully chosen echo of the humiliations she'd inflicted on me. Her face paled as I spoke. This is crazy. You can't dictate how I live in my own apartment. It won't be your apartment, Miss Winters, I corrected her gently. Not at the current rate. It will be a shared space. And these are my terms for sharing. She stood up, agitated, pacing again. I'll sue. I'll go to the tenants board. This is harassment. You could, I agreed, and you would undoubtedly lose. The lease is ironclad, and finding another apartment of this quality in this neighborhood at a price you can afford, well, I imagine that would be challenging, especially with your current financial situation. I let my gaze drift pointedly towards a pile of unopened bills on her otherwise pristine kitchen counter. The fight visibly drained out of her. She sank back onto the sofa, her shoulders slumped. The reality of her situation, her utter lack of leverage, was clearly crashing down on her. Why are you doing this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't answer directly. Instead, I produced a document from my briefcase. This is a simple addendum to your lease. A roommate agreement, if you will, outlining the terms we've discussed. Sign it, and you can stay at the original rent. She stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. I could see the struggle in her eyes, the humiliation, the desperation, the dawning, terrifying realization that she had no other choice. Slowly, reluctantly, she reached for the pen I offered. Her hand trembled as she signed her name. A wave of satisfaction washed over me, cold and sharp. I had her. But then, a strange, unexpected feeling followed in its wake. An emptiness. This meticulously planned revenge. This moment I'd fantasized about for years. It didn't feel as triumphant as I'd imagined. As I stood to leave, my eyes fell on a small, framed photograph on a side table. Veronica, younger, smiling, arm in arm with a woman who looked like an older version of herself. Her mother, presumably. Next to it, a bottle of prescription medication. Antidepressants, if I wasn't mistaken. The past due bills on the counter. The slight, almost imperceptible air of someone trying very hard to keep it all together. A flicker of something. Not pity, not yet, but a complicated, unwelcome emotion. I'd wanted justice. I'd wanted her to understand what it felt like to be powerless. But looking at her now, small and defeated in her luxurious cage, I felt a disquieting thought. Was I just becoming another kind of bully? I pushed the thought away. This was about consequences. This was about her finally facing them. "I'll be by next week to conduct an inspection," I said, my voice all business again, "to ensure the terms of our agreement are being met." I left her there, staring blankly at the signed paper, the architect of her own carefully constructed misery. 2 weeks. That's how long I gave Veronica to stew in the reality of her new, highly restricted life before my first inspection. I arrived unannounced, of course, just as she used to barge in on me. She opened the door, her eyes wide and startled. She looked diminished. The fight had gone out of her. I was meticulous. I checked the bathroom schedule, posted on the back of the door, a direct echo of the rules she'd once imposed. I noted, with feigned disapproval, a single rogue makeup brush left on the counter past her allotted time. I commented on the clutter in her half of the closet, now significantly reduced, forcing her to store most of her designer wardrobe in boxes under the bed. Her side of the bed, of course. Her distress was palpable, a low hum of humiliation in the air. But she was trapped. Financially, emotionally. She endured my critiques with a clenched jaw and downcast eyes. The game, however, was more than just enforcing petty rules. I started orchestrating coincidental encounters. An old classmate of ours, Sarah, who Veronica had relentlessly tormented over her acne, just happened to be dining at the restaurant where Veronica was having a lonely lunch. Sarah, now a successful dermatologist, gave Veronica a cool, appraising look, the kind Veronica herself used to specialize in. Another time, I arranged for Mark, a guy from our year whom Veronica had publicly humiliated by reading his private poetry aloud at a party, to be at the same art gallery opening. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His mere presence, the way he pointedly ignored Veronica, was enough. Veronica started to look haunted. These familiar faces, these echoes from a past she'd probably long since buried, were clearly unnerving her. The strange, restrictive living conditions, the sudden appearance of people she'd wronged. She wasn't stupid. She was starting to put the pieces together, or at least to sense that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Then I played my next card. Ryan. My only friend from that first miserable life. He'd become a successful software engineer, quiet and unassuming as ever, but with a core of steel I'd always admired. I offered him a newly renovated apartment in the building, a significant upgrade from his current place, at a very favorable rate. He was, of course, unaware of my larger plan. The first time Ryan saw Veronica in the lobby, his reaction was immediate and visceral. He stopped dead in his tracks, his face paling, then hardening. "Veronica Winters?" he said, his voice low and incredulous. Veronica, flustered by yet another ghost from her past, managed a weak, "Do I know you?" "You don't remember Maya Chen, do you?" Ryan's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a knife. "The girl whose life you made a living hell in room 312? The girl you forced to sleep on the floor? The girl who was always sick, always exhausted because of you?" Veronica looked genuinely bewildered. "Maya Chen? I barely remember her. She was quiet." "Quiet because you terrified her," Ryan shot back, his anger, long dormant, finally surfacing. "Quiet because you broke her." He shook his head, a look of disgust on his face, and walked away, leaving Veronica standing there, a confused, troubled expression on her face. I watched it all on the security feed, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Her not remembering me? That stung more than I expected. Was I so insignificant, so beneath her notice, that my suffering hadn't even registered? Veronica started investigating. I saw her on her laptop late at night, a frantic energy about her. She was searching for information about the building's owner, about Maya Chen. She was trying to understand the invisible net that was closing in around her. It was time for the final piece of the puzzle. During my next inspection, while Veronica was distracted, I accidentally left something behind. A small, worn, lockable diary. My diary, from my first life. I left it on her bedside table, right where she couldn't miss it. I knew she'd read it. Curiosity, desperation, the dawning, horrifying suspicion that her past was somehow intrinsically linked to her present torment, she wouldn't be able to resist. And she didn't. The next day, the diary was gone from the table. A week later, a letter arrived at my office, hand-delivered, from Veronica. Her attempt at an apology was clumsy, self-serving, full of justifications. She still didn't fully grasp the enormity of what she'd done, the true cost of her casual cruelty. I read it, my face impassive, and then I tossed it in the trash. But as I did, a strange, unwelcome feeling surfaced. This revenge, this elaborate, perfectly executed plan, it wasn't satisfying. It wasn't healing the wounds of the past. It felt empty, hollow. The ghost of that 20-year-old girl, the one who died alone and afraid, wasn't being appeased. She was just watching, her eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. A few days later, another letter arrived. This one was different, shorter, more direct. No justifications, no excuses. Just a raw, unvarnished account of her own struggles since college. The failed career aspirations, the mounting debt, the strained family relationships, and, at the end, 2 words that stopped me cold. I'm sorry. This time, I didn't throw the letter away. Veronica's second letter, I read it, then I read it again. My first instinct was dismissal, another ploy, another attempt to manipulate me. But the words, they had a different ring to them, a raw, unvarnished honesty that was unsettlingly genuine. My father, he hasn't spoken to me in 2 years, not since the last of his businesses failed. He blames me, says I was a disappointment, too flighty, not serious enough. The doctors, they said it was bipolar disorder, undiagnosed for years. Explains a lot, I guess. The highs, the lows, the terrible decisions. Not an excuse, just a reason. I found myself doing something I hadn't intended. I started investigating her claims. Discreetly, of course. It wasn't hard. My network was extensive. A few calls, a few carefully worded inquiries. And the truth, when it emerged, was uncomfortable. Harrison Winters had disowned her. His business empire had crumbled, and he'd taken his bitterness out on his only daughter. And the bipolar disorder? Medical records, obtained through less than official channels, confirmed it, diagnosed late, mismanaged for years. A strange mix of emotions churned within me. The cold satisfaction of her suffering warred with an unexpected, unwelcome flicker of empathy. She had been cruel, yes, unforgivably so. But her life, it seemed, hadn't been the seamless, gilded triumph I'd imagined. I remembered my own death, the suffocation, the fear, and then the impossible second chance, a chance Veronica never got. She was living out the consequences of her one flawed, uncorrected life. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her, not in her apartment, not in my office. Neutral ground. A small, anonymous coffee shop tucked away on a quiet side street. She looked terrible. Pale, dark circles under her eyes, her expensive clothes looking rumpled, out of place in the cheap cafe. She clutched a chipped mug of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. The conversation was tense, halting at first. But then, she started talking. Really talking. And for the first time, I listened. Not as Maya Chen, the avenging angel, but as someone else. Someone who understood perhaps a little bit about brokenness. She didn't make excuses. She didn't try to minimize what she'd done. She owned it. Every cruel word, every thoughtless act. She talked about the pressure from her family, the expectations, the constant feeling of not measuring up. She talked about the dizzying highs of her mania, the crushing lows of her depression, the years she'd spent not understanding what was wrong with her. "It doesn't excuse what I did to you, Maya," she said, her voice raw. "Nothing can. But I was a mess, a walking disaster. And you were just there. An easy target. A flashback, sharp and vivid. Lying in that narrow bed, gasping for air. The indifference in her eyes. This woman, this broken, flawed woman sitting across from me, had been a part of that. An architect of my demise. And yet, "I'll move out," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know where I'll go, but I'll leave. You deserve to have your peace." I looked at her, really looked at her, and the words that came out of my mouth surprised even me. "I don't want you to be homeless, Veronica." The revenge, I realized with a sudden startling clarity, wasn't working. It wasn't healing me, it was just perpetuating the pain. Holding on to it, nurturing it, had become its own kind of prison. I had all the power, all the control I'd ever dreamed of, and it felt empty. I took a deep breath. The aroma of stale coffee and burnt toast filled the air. A decision point, a crossroads. Continue down this path of meticulously planned retribution? Or something else? "Veronica," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "If you could go back, if you could do things differently, what would you change?" She looked up, her eyes wide, filled with a startled, hesitant hope. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of two lives. One ended, one reborn. Both irrevocably altered by the choices made in a small, cramped dorm room 15 years ago. I tore up the roommate agreement. Right there in the coffee shop, the scraps of paper fluttering onto the worn linoleum like oversized confetti. Veronica watched, her expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning relief. "The rent, however, stays at the new rate," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "Market value, no special arrangements." She nodded, a flicker of her old pride returning. "I understand. I'll figure something out." Then I told her everything, the first life, the dorm room, the undiagnosed heart condition, the way the stress, the constant fear, the lack of sleep had exacerbated it. The way I died, crammed against that cold wall while she and Chad watched a movie. Her face, as I spoke, went through a kaleidoscope of emotions. Disbelief, confusion, horror. And then, as I recounted details no one else could possibly know, the specific pattern of the faded wallpaper, the exact words of a cruel comment she'd made, the way the radiator in that room always clanked at 3 a.m., a dawning, terrified acceptance. I told her about the rebirth, waking up as a 10-year-old, memories intact. The second chance, the meticulous, decade-long plan for revenge. For this moment. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence. Veronica just stared at me, her face ashen. The bustling sounds of the coffee shop seemed to fade into the background. I killed you," she whispered, her voice choked with a horror that seemed to go bone deep. "Oh God, Maya, I had no idea." Tears streamed down her face, genuine, racking sobs that shook her entire body. Not the crocodile tears of the memorial service. These were real. This was the sound of a soul confronting its own darkness. We talked for hours that day. A raw, brutally honest conversation. About her life, her struggles, her undiagnosed illness. About my life, my pain, my obsession with a revenge that had ultimately failed to bring me peace. For the first time, we weren't bully and victim, tormentor and tormented. We were just two women, scarred by the past, trying to find a way forward. The revenge hadn't healed me. It had kept me tethered to the pain, to the anger. It had made me a prisoner of my own past. Watching Veronica suffer hadn't erased my own suffering. It had just added another layer of bitterness to it. "I'll leave," she said again, when the flow of words finally ebbed. "I'll leave the city. You deserve to never see me again." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the monster of my memories, but a flawed, broken human being. Someone who had made terrible mistakes, yes, but also someone who was perhaps capable of redemption. And in that moment, an idea began to form, a different path. Not revenge, not even forgiveness, not yet, but something else. No, I said slowly. I don't want you to leave. I paused, the idea solidifying in my mind. I have a proposition for you, Veronica. You can stay in the apartment at the normal market rate rent. If, if you'll help me with a project. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and trepidation. A project? What kind of project? I'm converting a section of this building, I said, gesturing vaguely towards the direction of the Phoenix lofts, into subsidized housing. For students, students from disadvantaged backgrounds, students like I was. Veronica had, in her scattered, unfocused way, dabbled in interior design. It was one of the few things she'd ever shown a genuine talent for, a fleeting passion that had been snuffed out by her own insecurities and lack of discipline. I need someone to help with the design, I said, to make these spaces not just functional, but welcoming, dignified, someone with an eye for detail, someone who understands what it's like to need a safe space. She stared at me, speechless. It's just an offer, I said. Think about it. The new wing of the Phoenix Lofts, the Maya Chen's Scholars' Residence, was officially opening. Sunlight streamed through the large windows of the communal lounge, illuminating the bright, cheerful colors, the comfortable, modern furniture, the carefully chosen artwork. It was beautiful, welcoming, a world away from the grim, oppressive dorm room I remembered. Veronica stood beside me, a quiet, almost shy presence. She was different, calmer, more centered. The year hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, arguments, moments when the old dynamics threatened to resurface. But we'd worked through them. She'd thrown herself into the project with a passion and dedication I'd never thought her capable of. Her design sense was impeccable. She'd understood, intuitively, what I wanted these rooms to be. Sanctuaries. Places of hope. We weren't friends, not exactly. The past was too deep, the scars too raw for that. But there was a respect. A grudging, hard-won understanding. We were collaborators, two women who had, in our own ways, found a measure of healing in creating something positive out of the wreckage of our shared history. A group of students, the first cohort of Maya Chen scholars, were chattering excitedly, their faces bright with anticipation. They were young, full of dreams, just like I had been all those years ago. But their journey, I hoped, would be different, easier, safer. I watched them, a small, genuine smile on my face. The ghost of that 20-year-old girl, the one who had died alone and afraid, finally felt at peace. In my first life, I died without ever standing up for myself. In my second, I learned that true power isn't about control or revenge. It's about breaking cycles and creating something better. Something that lasts. Something that might, just might, make the world a slightly better place. One dorm room, one second chance at a time.